Now, if you haven't noticed, I'm answering every single comment down there in the YouTube comment section, at least the first 200 of them on every single video. And because I've answered thousands of comments this offseason, I've seen a pretty common trends. Some mistakes that I think people are making across fantasy football. I want to go through on and make a concise video where I think I can give you the most actionable and the most helpful fantasy football advice for 2022, whether that's you're about to be in your draft or maybe you already drafted, but you want to fix how you're allocating those bench roster spots. But before we dive into it, you know what I'm going to ask? Go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. I'm going to reply to the first 200 comments yet again on this video because I appreciate all the support so much. And because y'all have been supporting so much, I'm going to continue to live stream real money fantasy football drafts every single night. So if you want to get in a draft with me, or maybe you just want to go get in some extra drafts in the public lobby, or maybe with your friends, you can go draft on Underdog Fantasy. And what's great about Underdog Fantasy is it's best ball. So that means there's no time commitment at all during the season. So you're able to add it just as an extra 1, 2, or 500 leagues in my case. But when you go and sign up for Underdog and use promo code FLOCK, because the special partnership we have with them, I worked as hard as I could to get y'all this. If you make a $10 deposit on Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, you get our 2022 fantasy football rankings and our 2022 fantasy football draft guide. 300 pages with a $10 deposit, and they'll match that deposit, so it's essentially free for you. Make sure you take advantage of that in the comment section. But let's go into these overall strategy points that I think are going to be very important. And in my opinion, the most important thing you could ever do in fantasy football is going to understand how to optimize for your league format. Now, I understand we all think that we're playing the same game here. We all think that we have the same exact objective, and that's just to take the best players on the board. But in reality, there are two completely different strategies that you're going to need to implement if you're playing in, say, a 10-team league where you start one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, a tight end, a flex, a kicker, and a defense. Versus if you're playing, say, in a 12-team league where you start one quarterback, two running backs, three receivers, a tight end, three flex spots, a kicker, and a defense. I mean, if I'm going through and approaching those two different drafts, my draft philosophy is going to be wildly different. So let's first cover that shallow league, whether that's an 8-team league you're playing in, a 10-teamer, or maybe even a 12-team league where you only have one flex spot and you only have to start two wide receivers. If we break down the expected fantasy points on a week-by-week basis from the different positions you're looking at, in that shallow format, you are going to have so many of your starting lineup points coming just from the quarterback and the tight end positions. Those onesie positions in that shallow format are going to give you a significant edge because say you draft a Travis Kelce and you're going up against your league mate who has Cole Kmet, and the expected points you're going to be getting from Travis Kelce on a week-to-week basis, let's call it 17, maybe 18. We'll call it 17 points. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, with a Cole Kmet, say he's getting that owner 10 points per game. That's going to be a 7-point gap where in that shallow format, it is damn near impossible for your league mate to go through and try to fill that 7 points up through the aggregate. Whereas in that deeper format, say you're playing in a league where your league has 12 members, they can each start 3 wide receivers mandatory and then 3 flex spots on top of that. If they're slightly better than you at wide receiver 1, slightly better at wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, and then flex 1, flex 2, flex 3, it is going to be so much easier for them to overcome your elite tight end scoring if they just filter down for that wide receiver depth and they start as many guys that look like Brandon Cooks as possible. Where in that shallow format, a Brandon Cooks is doing that owner nothing. If they're throwing out Brandon Cooks and you have maybe a more boring wide receiver, someone like, I don't know, a Hunter Renfrow, in reality, that points per game gap is not going to be large, and there are not going to be enough total roster spots for them to be able to beat you in the aggregate. So if you're playing in that shallower format, what I really suggest is you going out there and reaching a little bit on that elite level tight end, reaching a little bit on that elite level quarterback, whether that's drafting Travis Kelce at the 1-2 turn, whether that's drafting, say, a Mark Andrews at the 2-3 turn, Kyle Pitts in the late third, whatever that may be. Make sure you get that tight end that has that elite level ceiling. Same thing at quarterback. If you want to take Josh Allen in the third in that format, by all means, go for it. I think that's going to give you a significant edge where your league mates are going to have a hard time overcoming. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, if we're going to be looking at that deeper league, say it's a 12 team, a 14 team league where you have to start 3 wide receivers and you have 2 to 3 flex spots. So instead of only being able to start 3 wide receivers total, you can start up to 5 or 6. All of a sudden, the supply and demand ratio and what's going to be available on the waiver wire at the position is going to be completely skewed. Where in that format, you're going to be a lot more willing to say, you know what? We can get a significant edge if we just go through, build around receivers. We take a Stephon Diggs or a Jamar Chase round 1, then we hammer in Deebo Samuel round 2. We followed up in round 3 with a wide receiver that we maybe really like with the Keenan Allen. And over the aggregate, it doesn't matter if you're missing out on that elite level tight end. It doesn't matter if you're missing out on that elite level quarterback, because if you're slightly better at wide receiver 1, 2, 3, flex 1, 2, 3, then your league mate, you're going to be able to easily overcome that tight end advantage or that quarterback advantage that they may have. So understanding the depth of your individual league and how that should alter your positional draft strategy is going to be, in my opinion, the most important thing in fantasy football, and it's not even close. But now let's kind of transition that overall drafting strategy with your league format over to how we should be optimizing the last bench spots on your roster. Because if we're looking at the last 1 to 2 guys on your bench, what is that pretty much an extension of? That's an extension of the waiver wire. You're essentially going out there and saying, oh, these waiver wire caliber players, I just want to make sure that we have first access to them. I want to be able to go and maybe pick up the Keel Herbert before anybody else can. So we're going to have him down there as our 6th bench guy, and just going across the board. Now, what kind of players have access to hitting an elite level ceiling that you may see from the very end of your bench? Is it going to be the veteran wide receiver where you know exactly what you're getting? Is it going to be the Nico Collins in Houston, where we know from a raw points per game perspective, this is someone that should be seeing a decent amount of targets. He should have a nice role in his offense, even if the overall ceiling is going to be capped. Even if we know Houston's not going to put up a lot of points, it'll never be the wide receiver 1 over Brandon Cooks. Is that the type of wide receiver that we want to be rostering with the last few of our bench spots? In reality, no, because that player is going to have a million lookalikes on the waiver wire, and they're all going to be about the same on a week-to-week basis, where nothing really can change in their situation to all of a sudden make them a league-winning player. I would argue that even if Brandon Cooks were to go down due to injury, all of a sudden, are you looking at Nico Collins as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy? No. Are you looking at him as a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy? No. He's still going to be a wide receiver 3 at the very best. So those players that may have a high floor but a low ceiling in fantasy football, those are the worst guys to be rostering at the very end of your bench. Instead, what we need to be looking for is players that have wide range of outcomes. We need to see players that maybe have a very high ceiling, but they're not valued that high in fantasy because they also have a very low floor. A perfect example of this, instead of going after Nico Collins, why don't you go after a George Pickens? I know it's a cherry-picked example, obviously has a ton of hype. Now he's no longer that into bench guy. But say you had your fantasy football draft 2 weeks ago before we had all this George Pickens hype, and we identified a rookie that you didn't exactly know what he was going to be, but we did know that he had that wide range of outcomes where, hell, maybe he does come out and he is so damn talented, he overcomes the situation and he immediately steps into a role that has him as, say, rookie year Jalen Waddle. That is what we need to be doing with our last bench spots. We don't need to be taking the high floor players where we know exactly what they're going to get us. No, we need to be using those last bench spots on guys that could either be studs or duds. Because in reality, when we get to the beginning portion of the season, those guys are probably going to be cut for you anyway. You're probably going to find someone that you like even more on the waiver wire. You're going to try to find next year's James Robinson, Elijah Mitchell from 2020 and 2021. So what I would say is, let's make it very clear and cut. Those players at the very end of our roster, if they're duds, great, cut them. Who the hell cares? If they're studs, great. We just hit on a player with an elite ceiling. Now let's move over to what we should be doing with bye weeks. In my opinion, this is quite possibly the worst thing that the casual fantasy football drafter does. Please, in your draft, I know it looks so simple. You see the player's name and you have their bye week right after that. ignore the bye week. It does not matter in the slightest. A big reason for this is the majority of these bye weeks that are going to get hit this upcoming season is about weeks 9, 11, 10, so months into the future. And in reality, is your fantasy football team going to look anything like it does today when we get to week 11? No, you are going to have injuries. You're going to have those waiver wire pickups. You're going to have trades. So why are we going through and why are we trying to pretend that this team we draft today is going to be the same team that we have in week 11? So if you were to go through and say, draft a running back 1 and a running back 2 on the same bye, and then later on in that same draft, you're on the clock and there's a running back 3 sitting there and you're like, oh, you know what? I can't take him. I love the value. But in reality, this is a player that shares a bye week with my running back 1, my running back 2, and I'm going to have to find an answer during the... No, you're overthinking it. At this point, you need to be taking players that you like the profile of. You need to be taking players that fit your roster construction, and you should not be worried about bye weeks at all, because your roster is going to change a lot. You have no idea what it's going to look like 2 months from now. And on top of that, not only is your roster going to change a lot, worst case scenario, if you're at half your team's strength in 1 week, who the hell cares? So we'll all even out in the end where you may be at half strength in week 11 if you have all your players stacked up on the same bye. But what that would mean is if your league mates all spaced out their bye weeks, they're going to be at 90% strength every week during that bye week stretch, where if you get yours all out of the way in a singular week, you're at 100% strength. It all evens out. Never think about your buys when you're going through and drafting players unless it's a true 50-50 coin flip and you're just using it as a tie break. Now, let's go back over to the quarterback and tight end position, because I do think that these are very important positions from a strategy standpoint to nail down. And a massive mistake that I see with quarterbacks is people that have been playing fantasy football for the past decade, where they learned back in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, that the most optimal draft strategy was to punt quarterback, never take a quarterback in round 1, round 2, like all these suckers are doing, drafting Drew Brees there every single season, because you can easily stream the position based off matchups. You can find a quarterback with a similar week projection every single week. Now, what I will say, this strategy worked to a T, was 100% the GTO strategy that you had back in that time period. But in today's fantasy football landscape, zero quarterbacks dead. Streaming the quarterback position is dead. The reason for this is back in those years, you didn't have these quarterbacks that could go out there and run the ball, pick up 500, 600 rushing yards, and still have it in the range of outcomes to go out there and lead the NFL in passing. You didn't have these quarterbacks that could legitimately break fantasy football with their ceilings. I mean, the perfect example of this is looking at possibly one of the best quarterback seasons ever with Peyton Manning back in 2015 when he broke NFL records with passing yards, passing touchdowns. And we look at the fact that Lamar Jackson outscored him in 2019. You look at the points that Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, these elite level quarterbacks are able to put up. They significantly stand out from the rest of the group, and it doesn't even matter the matchup. So while yes, it was GTO, while yes, it was optimal to go through and to draft just running backs, receivers early over the past decade and don't even take a quarterback to the last round of your draft, if you're doing that now, you are just going to get crushed every single week. Now, let's go back over to that tight end position. And here with tight end, we already discussed that if you're in that deeper format where you have a ton of flex spots, you want to prioritize wide receiver, that's probably going to be the spot where you want to go through and you want to punt the tight end position. Paying up for Travis Kelce, paying up for Mark Andrews may not necessarily make sense. But if we are wanting to say punt that tight end position, the worst thing you could do is all of a sudden you're in round 6, 7, 8. You find that you've already filled out your starting lineup spots at running back, at wide receiver, and you're like, okay, yeah, we got to fill out our starting tight end slot. So you go through and you reach on a tight end like a Dawson Knox, like a Zach Ertz in round 8. If we look at the data for what we've had over the past 3 seasons, that tight end that you may draft that finishes as a mid tight end 1, that finishes as the tight end 6, the tight end 7, the tight end 8, even if you drafted them as the tight end 11, they're not giving you an edge. The tight end 8 over the past 3 years has been almost identical to the tight end 20 on a points per game basis, to someone that you're going to get off the waiver wire, to a Tyler Higbee, to a Robert Tonyan, to a Noah Fant that you could potentially just draft in the last round of your draft. And if it doesn't work out, go pick up that guy off waivers in week 1. Go pick up that guy off waivers in week 2. So at tight end, you really need to understand what we are doing based on that league format. If you're in a shallow league, hammer in an elite option. If you're in a deeper league, punt the elite options, but don't stop there. Punt the middle round options and wait until the very end of your draft and then go through and grab that David Njoku, grab that Tyler Higbee, grab that Robert Tonyan, grab that Gerald Everett, really whoever your favorite late round tight end is. Now, I think that's all I got. I really hope that this was able to help you out. If it did, please go down there, drop that like. And like I said, I'm going to be answering the first 200 comments down there in the comment section below. So make sure if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Just go down there and ask them in the comments. But thank you. I appreciate you. I hope that we get to draft with you tonight. And yeah, have a great day.